Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I've got a bit of housekeeping, I'm afraid, to go through first. I'll introduce myself for those who don't know me. I'm Malcolm Price. I'm the lead member of Strategic Planning and Regeneration North Devon Council. And I'm really honoured to be chairing this committee, which is one of the most important ones across the two councils. Which will see its work carry on into the next council as well. So we've got some very important work to do. Can I say welcome to our colleagues from across the Water and Torridge, and hope that again today that we can continue a very successful joint working. A reminder, please, to switch off your mobile phones, or certainly switch them on to silent. There are members of the public and press attending this meeting virtually. So can I ask those attending virtually to switch off your microphone to avoid any disruption during the meeting? We can do with that. The meeting is being recorded and will be available in due course on the council's YouTube channel, which you can watch in the evenings if you've got anything more exciting to do. The meeting to ensure that those attending virtually can hear the proceedings and for the recording to capture the entire meeting, please ensure that you project your voice and speak clearly. It's a formal meeting and therefore do not refer to each other by first names if you can avoid it. I find that really difficult. I really do. And if anybody needs the loos, I think we've got some visitor badges here, so we can get through to all the facilities that we need to. And there is water here, hopefully, for members to share. So item number 1, apologies for absence.
Apologies from Councillor Watson, who sent Councillor Pennington as a sub, Councillor Clark, Councillor Hackett, I believe. Is that the others?
Yeah. Councillor Wiseman.
I'm subbing for one of them.
Oh,
Phil Hackett, I think.
okay, lovely, thank you.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Could we agree the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 15th of July 2022? Can I just ask that we look to add one thing in addition, because I think there was some concern, wasn't there, looking to have an SJ about the Barnstable Bideford railway line and the minute. There's a claim really that it may not have completely accurately recorded our decision. Can we give some comfort for that and put it right for these minutes so that?
Was the issue that it wasn't flagged up in the officer report that forms part of the agenda today? So the final item on the agenda, which looks at local plan review options, I believe there was concern that project isn't identified. I think when we get to that,
we can ensure that's lovely. Thank
as opposed to minutes, I think the minutes do that to it.
Okay. If members are happy with that, then we can pick that up later on. The other thing is, of course, as I mentioned just now, we're coming to the end of the term of the councils. We've actually got a date set, which would overlap into the period of PERDA before the district elections next year. So with your permission, we would like to bring it forward a week so we could avoid the PERDA and we can get on and still make proper decisions. Otherwise, it would be a bit of a talking shop because we wouldn't be able to do the things we probably need to do. It is the week before, isn't it? The 17th of March is the suggestion rather than the 24th of March. Does that seem to me? Did that happen with that? Thank you.
That's okay.
I'm told I should take a formal vote on the minutes. So
I'll move the chair for
thank you
you.
very, thank you very much.
Second.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Liz?
Sorry, you're moving the minutes.
Yeah.
I just had a query on page 4. I haven't got it up on my. Unfortunately. It's about the Hellas. And it was consideration of which was set aside for a future review.
committee discussed the composition of the health panel with particular reviews of community representation, the consideration of which was set aside for a future review, which is today.
Well, yeah, I didn't think it's very clear, really. So that means we're going to review the hell out today on the agenda then.
Yeah, it's on the agenda.
Did it not this minute relate to community considerations? Sorry, I can't see it. What was the minute again?
Yeah, well, the minute relates to the constitution of the HELA panel, in particular community representation.
That was there. So that absolutely correct, Councillor Holmes. At the last committee, the methodology was considered and approved by members of the Joint Policy Committee. Through that process, it was recognised and highlighted by officers that agreement with the panel subject to a separate consultation as it was set out in the methodology, and that happened virtually. That day, so I can't, but members were agreed on the selection process behind it as for the methodology requirement to consult with members. The HELA item on the agenda today is to look at an update on where officers are with the HELA, and there is reference to.
So that reference to a future review related to the informal meeting we had a month or so ago.
Yes. Specifically in terms of the panel.
Right, well, to bring it on the agenda, if I
The item of the HELA is on the agenda, but we did hold an informal meeting where all members were invited. Councillor Hayden, I know, I don't recall that you said any apologies.
I'm so sorry.
I don't recall.
I
But it was specifically for that reason.
I have something to bring up anyway under the hell up item on the agenda then. Have we considered the agenda of that we approved the agenda at some point?
The agenda is the agenda, which I and Bob Hicks, Councillor Hicks and I both agreed some weeks back.
Yeah, not having it in front of me, so we're not going to approve an agenda then at this meeting.
This particular point, sorry, just is to approve the minutes of that
Yes,
one,
we
and
can
then
go on
that
to-
will go on the next item. I think.
That's the next item.
The HELA, sorry, is on there.
Yeah, so it's an item later in the agenda.
Sorry, yeah, okay.
I'm
I don't see anything.
I mean, if you're suggesting that we have to agree the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, then I'm sorry, but I would challenge that. We set an agenda. The items on will allow you to make the points, I think, Councillor Haynes, that you want to make. Because there is a particular.
I wanted to make the point that I thought we were going to have the opportunity to look at what we're going to focus on in terms of the policy reviews. So I thought at the last meeting, we said, it was pointed out we had a limited time span, so we were going to prioritise particular aspects of the local plan review.
That item is also on the agenda.
That is, I wanted to clarify that we have the opportunity to do that today, so I couldn't quite see how it fitted into the agenda.
I think item 10, local plan review, we'll pick up all those issues.
Right, thank you very much.
Good. With those in favour then of that we approve the minutes?
Thank you.
Anyone against? Thank you. Well, thank you very much. So we move on then. Item 4, of course, declarations of interest. Anybody got any interest there which would be planned?
I've received none.
Item 5, to agree the agenda between A and B, there is nothing in part A. The item number 6 then is the highlight report. I'll hand over to Nina Lake, the head of programme management performance.
So the purpose of the highlight report is to provide the committee with a summary of progress to date with the Goodman Place project, covering the change control, key risks and issues, and progress in the current period. So during change control, we had 2 items to note. First of all, the planning policy team was tasked with assessing the current joint local plan through the Planning Advisory Service self-assessment toolkit to establish the soundness and legal compliance of our existing plans. We have an item 10 on today's agenda, which is going to look at the local plan review and that set out the work to date on that assessment. The second element of change control, senior officers reached out to the Planning Advisory Service to determine if they were able to provide some support with the review. And we welcome Martin Hutchins from PAS. He's kindly joined us today on this meeting, and he will introduce himself and set out their offer following this item. So in terms of matters for escalation, one of our first issues is that we've lost several members of the original project team, both from Torridge and North Devon, which have left us with resource gaps and knowledge gaps. Both councils have developed a job description to try and bridge this gap, to bring in a experienced and qualified planning policy officer, but also with project management experience. Unfortunately, even though this opportunity was publicised far and wide, we haven't actually had a suitable candidate come forward. So we're now exploring other opportunities via Capita. So that work is ongoing. Sorry, I've lost my train. So that's being reviewed. And Martin's also going to be able to help us review the local development scheme in a timetable, because we have some slippage. The other issue coming forward was our inability to currently demonstrate the 5-year housing land supply. I need to point out an error that I've made in this report. I put November, and it should have actually said February 2023. So apologies for that. But this issue is going to be covered in much greater detail under items 8 today on the agenda. In terms of progress to date, the team have been working extremely hard, particularly around the HELA, but also developing some briefs to enable us to take forward our proportionate evidence base. So we've developed briefs around the housing and economic development needs assessment. We've had 2 tenders returned in relation to that, ranging between £40,000 and £70,000. We've had a return for our Gypsy and Traveller brief, again 2 tenders ranging from £12,000 to £34,000. The retail and leisure study have been again around the £40,000 mark. And we were waiting for a response from the Environment Agency around the strategic flood risk assessment brief, and that came in this morning. What we plan to do with this, with all of the government changes and the varying pieces of legislation, one moment we're hearing one thing with regards to targets, and that seems to be changing. What we didn't want to do is go out immediately and commission these works. There's a lot of money involved in these. PAS are also going to help us with the scope of our evidence base. So what we intend to do is just pause on this just for a moment, just so we can get some greater clarity. We're going to go back to those potential suppliers who have very kindly taken the time to provide us their responses, and just ask for some time so we can have that consideration. I don't plan to go through all the other elements of work that have been going on. I think that's covered the pertinent point that I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Members? Councillor, do you want to?
No, it's pretty sad. We're back with resources. Exactly. Yeah. Certainly. Go out to these studies, bring all the information together.
It's just having this moment in time to determine whether we do need to carry out that comprehensive review or whether it's going to be more targeted. And I think once we've had assistance in establishing that, then we can determine which elements of this proportionate evidence we need to commission. There are really expensive pieces of work. Our resources are tight across both sides of the water for all the reasons that we know. I think we just need to be really smart and focused in which ones we select. It may be that these 4 that I've mentioned today are those, but I think it would be prudent just to pause just for a moment, just to establish that we're putting the investment in the right place.
Just going to ask clarity on point 2. But even if the work is delivered, and it might not be re-established, we have to have confidence. It sounds like we were wishing we could have a 5-year land supply. It reads as though we were wishing now.
I think we all wish it.
Yeah.
And hopefully we will, you know, we're on the verge of knowing whether whether we have one again now, so.
Right.
But I mean, it seems to me that those 4 pieces of work are going to be needed at some point in any case. I mean, I think the recommendation is to note where we are with the whole fire just for a little, very short period of time. And we had that debate under item 10 later on this morning.
Okay.
About whether we continue to go for a completely new plan or whether we amend our ambition so that we actually say, let's look in some particular areas and update where we know we've got some issues.
Sure.
So I think then once item 10, we've decided the course in which we want to travel, then I think then we could decide which ones we need straight away.
Thank you, Officer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we should just give a hand
Yeah.
over now to Martin, who's joining us from the Planning Advisory Service. Martin is going to set out how he's going to assist us on our journey with the local plan. Martin, camera on. Yep, there you go.
Hello, can you all hear me? I'm on wave, yep. Okay, first of all, thanks for inviting me along to today's meeting. Yeah, as has been said, we had a discussion with planners at North Devon and Torridge, and first of all, I think, sorry, just before I go into that, would you like me just to quickly explain who Planning Advisory Service are and what we do? Just for the benefit of the recording.
Yeah, please.
We are funded by the Department for Levelling Up Homes and Communities, but we are part of the Local Government Association. So all of our funding goes into helping local planning authorities produce local plans and to help improve and support the development management services. So all of our funding goes into helping local councils improve their planning services. And as part of that, I'm responsible for delivering our support for councils that are reviewing or putting a new local plan together. And that's how I've become involved with North Devon and Torridge. And we provide 3 areas of support. The main area of support is to help councils with their timetabling and the project management of their local plan production. So what we do essentially is we provide a critical friend review, and we call that critical friend because we're part of the local government family. We're not inspecting what you're doing. We're going to look at your overall project plan at the moment. We will look at what the programme of work involves, what resources you have in place, and we'll then have a look at what's been done so far, what there's left to do, and we'll help you plan out a realistic and achievable timetable for delivering a local plan. And part of that work is, I guess, to help at the beginning to understand exactly where the plan is and where you're taking it, and we'll go on that journey with you. But essentially, we're here working with the councils and the planning staff and members to understand the current position with the plan and to help you plot out a realistic and achievable timetable for delivering the work that's going to be involved in hopefully eventually coming up with your local plan and getting that adopted. That's in a nutshell what the support is. I don't know if to go into too much more detail, but I think it might be useful if anyone has questions about our involvement and our support. I'd be happy to answer those.
I'll throw that open to members. Martin, I mean, how long do you see your involvement? First of all, is it a commitment that's going to see us through how long of the process? Not all of the process.
Well, the initial piece of work that we do is between sort of 4 and 6 weeks of work. So we do a desktop review of where you've got to so far, and I've already got some information from officers about some of the work you've done to understand where you are at the moment and the work that's going on. We provide a view on that, and we issue what we call an advice note, which sets out our view on your current position, where it is you're heading, and some recommendations about what we think you should do next. And that might cover things around, well, it will cover things around the evidence base, resources in place, and the timetable that's currently proposed. That advice note will have recommendations, as I just said, and those recommendations we will, if we're able to help you with those, whatever we recommend that you've got to do next, we'll certainly look to be involved with you going along. So it's more of an initial view, feedback, and some recommendations, and we'll also be sort of pointing out where we can help you going forward with those recommendations. Some of the recommendations we may not be the organisation actually to help you with that, but we will signpost you to other support that we might have in our programme. So it is a single piece of work, but it's like a bit of a gateway. It then opens up potential opportunities to take other support forward, and we're very much here to support and hopefully build some capacity in your team along the way. I understand resources are tight, as they are across most councils. So while we're not stepping in to literally sort of do work, we are hoping to sort of coach and build up some skills within your team going forward to help with that sort of capacity.
Thank you, Mark. That does help. Any questions? Anybody? Members or officers? Anybody? If not, thank you, Martin, for joining us today, and thank you and your team for the help. I mean, I know from both sides of the water, well, both councils have had these resource issues, and I think members of we've been trying to grapple with the issue about whether we still go for this full review or whether we just do full review or parts of the plan that we know are out of date and need updating. Are you likely to come within this bit of work fairly soon? Would you be likely to come with your recommendation on that particular issue as well?
We're hoping to start the work off, I think, as early as next week, possibly the week after. I've just had to remind myself of the dates, but we're starting the work imminently. We've got some dates to start that off. In terms of the point you just made, what we'll do is, it's not really our place to advise you to go one way or the other, but what we will do in our report is set out the pros and cons of the situation that you're facing. So do you go for a full plan review or a partial plan review? We will set out our opinion on the pluses and minuses for maybe both scenarios. And because it's very much advice, as I say, it's a critical friend review rather than a consultancy review that's going to push you one way or the other. But we'd like to set all of the information that we think you need to understand to make the best decision.
Thank you. Any other issues? Any other questions anybody wants to raise? Yeah.
Can I just ask when we would be expecting the results of that piece of work from Martin?
We try and deliver the piece of work within 6-week time frame. So I would hope to have this delivered with you before Christmas.
Thank you.
That is helpful.
Hopefully early December. That's what we'd hopefully try and get to.
Very much indeed. If there are no other questions, thank you, Martin. You're very welcome to stay and listen to the rest if you'd like to.
If that's okay, I do find these things interesting, funnily enough.
Useful.
Thank
Could
you.
think, under item 10 particularly, members have got some strong views, I think, on which would be. So thank you, Martin, very much indeed.
Thank you.
Members, returning to the report in front of us, recommendation under item 4 is that we note the current issues and support the principle of the external support that we've we're looking for. You mentioned about capital as well. And that will be, you'll be through this report, you continue with that. It's approved today.
Prior to taking the lead on that recruitment, I believe they're having those conversations. That's to try and fulfill project manager, moving that technical expertise. That's
Members? You're happy to
I recommend that recommendation, Mr. Chair.
second? Thank you, councillor Longtown. Those in favour? Anyone against? Overwhelmed. Thank you very much, Celia. Item 7 then is the stakeholder feedback, the workshop feedback, and that's Eleanor's report, isn't it?
yes, definitely. Be sharing the clicker around.
I'll bring it over to you. You can work that one out.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. This item is to report to you the outcomes of the stakeholder workshop, which we held on the 20th of June 2022. The workshop took place at Cadstown Business Support Centre with 24 stakeholders and 9 officers to facilitate. 49 stakeholders were invited from organisations across Northern Devon. A recommendation for the final version of the report is to include a list in the appendix showing all the organisations and groups who were invited. Stakeholders who represented their organisations on the day covered a good range of interests, and during the 3-hour workshop, they all contributed to discussions in 4 small breakout groups. Groups were organised to allow a mixture of interests within each group. This is not the first and only time that stakeholders will be involved. Officers will continue to communicate with all identified stakeholders throughout the process. So on the day, stakeholders were welcomed with some introductions and housekeeping, and they took part in a short icebreaker question to give the afternoon, short presentation summarising the local plan, why this is important, and the part we can all play to give to stakeholders, and led into the first of 3 main activities. The activity starts with an icebreaker to allow facilitators to see how much the stakeholders understood around the purpose of local plans and what they are. A large majority had heard of a local plan, several understood what a local plan was, and a few had been involved in preparing one. A short discussion in the breakout groups gave stakeholders an opportunity to discuss the question, what do you think is the purpose of the local plan? And generally, they understood it to be guidance or a framework for development and a document which can support local vision and growth. Page 32 in the agenda shows the stakeholders' response to the icebreaker in more detail. Activity 1 asks stakeholders to consider any issues and challenges facing their own organisations, as well as anyone they might represent or communities in Northern Devon. Figure on page 33 in the agenda shows a summary of the responses and where they fit into 3 themes: social, environmental and economic. Overall, there were a wide range of views, some being unique to a specific organisation. A few key issues and challenges were mentioned by several stakeholders. These were often around the provision of housing, especially affordable housing, and the accompanying infrastructure. Many stakeholders found recruitment an issue and linked this to funding and opportunities in rural areas. Meeting demands between government policies and local issues were discussed as being a challenge, as was adapting to meet potential net zero requirements in the future. As several issues and challenges were discussed, pages 33 to 35 of the agenda show these in more detail by theme. Activity 2 allowed stakeholders to declare their key priorities and any major projects they need to deliver. As per the report's conclusion, it was noted that there were links between the issues faced and the key priorities for stakeholders, with many priorities aiming to tackle the issues and challenges. Page 36 in the agenda shows the discussion grouped by the social, environmental and economic themes. Generally, the main priorities focused on improvements to infrastructure and housing, Gaining further support for organisations trying to use sustainable methods and further collaboration between organisations. Many recognise the importance of delivering more affordable housing, and some thought a circular economy could help reduce costs for building while supporting local businesses. As in activity 1, there was a range of views to discuss, and pages 35 to 37 in the agenda show this in more detail. Activity 3 was a question and answer session, which allowed stakeholders to ask any questions they had at the end of the session. This activity was also a chance to look forwards and tell stakeholders that we wanted them to be involved, understand how they can help us to influence the shape of Northern Devon. Questions alongside officers' responses on the day are on pages 38 to 40 of the agenda. Most stakeholders appeared positive about meeting in person and welcomed this opportunity. Council recognised the importance of engagement and continue to involve stakeholders in the future. And it was suggested that involving the public further and providing a simple version of the plan be useful both for the public and stakeholders. It was recognised that engagement through people in place was a good start to getting more people on board and involving local communities where possible. So if I could just draw your attention to the recommendations. The recommendations from this report are to note the findings of the stakeholder workshop as set out in the draft stakeholder workshop report. Is alongside the recommendation from today to include the invitee list in the final report. Thank you, Chair. That's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? I think members found it a useful exercise. Yeah. Any issues raised from the?
I just noted what Petra said. There should be two plans and one much more simple. People, the general public can better grasp. As it is, a very deep document. In our neighbourhood plan report. If there was something relatively simple.
Something on like a vision chapter that summarise the aims of the plan rather than all the detailed policy. Yeah. Councillor Payne.
Page 41, sorry, at the bottom here. One public state. What does one public state mean?
If I'm all right to answer that, Chair?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So One Public State is a national programme. So it works with councils to transform local communities for a variety of projects and they're committed.
So what does that mean?
They can provide support for places looking to create a more economic growth and more use of resources in it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Any other issue? If not, are you happy to adopt the findings and the recommendations from the workshops?
I'm quite happy, Chairs.
Liz Paper? Yes, thank you, that's carried. Item 8, the Housing and Economic Land Availability Assessment, the HELA, 5-year land supply update, pages 91 to 98. I think this is a joint effort between Ben and Mark, is that? I know Mark's been nagging all sorts of people about the 5-year land supply for a number of months now.
Yeah.
I imagine, Ben, you're doing the same over your time. Over to you, anyway.
Good afternoon, members. So this report provides a progress update on the what we've been doing on the HELA. It sets out indicative future timescales for the work associated 5-year housing land supply assessment. So as we've discussed before, as you may know already, the HELA, so it's the Housing Economic Availability Assessment, provides an assessment of the potential for a range of identified sites contribute to future delivery, housing and economic development across Northern Devon. The HELA will provide information on the supply development sites to inform the local plan process, as well as the evidence required to identify a 5-year supply of housing land. The report sets out some of the reasons, or the main reasons why work on the 5-year land supply was integrated into the HELA. I won't go into those in detail now, but I think the key point is that either way, whether they were integrated or done separately, it's a substantial, complex piece of work, resource intensive, is a key element. Requires a large volume of evidence to be gathered by officers. For example, information from landowners and developers, statutory consent schemes. The evidence required of the land supply and below is significant. In particular, this is to ensure that when we assess the housing supply, it's the requirement, the stringent requirements set out in the national policy, the NPPF, particularly in terms of the level of evidence that's needed to demonstrate that sites can deliver within 5 years. Just to go through some of the progress to date on the HELA and the 5-year supply. So a draft HELA methodology was consulted on in 2022. This was methodology was then updated in response to the consultation, endorsed by the JTPC back on the 5th of July. Various bits of technical work ongoing in terms of databases, GIS, intensive. We had a call for silence, which took place alongside the methodology consultation. Received a total of 336 site submissions, very even split between and college sites. Our current focus is primarily those sites which are currently going through the planning system, specifically in respect of the sites that we anticipate potentially it's the 5 years of drive. Alongside this, we've set up a stakeholder panel. Role of the panel is specialist skills, knowledge, to support partner the JSNs in the assessment of potential sites. So this panel will assist us in both the sense of the 5-year supply element of the work, and also do the assessment of new sites. So just to look at the next steps in the project timescales, those set up there. Without going through them completely, I think just the key thing to note is that these timescales are a best estimate based on our current progress with the HELA, the number and scale of site assessments required, and the expectation of receiving relevant information in each site in this time manner. This will make the best endeavours to deliver the timescale. However, timescale deliver plus information on each site will guarantee. While the timescales indicate private authorities will be in a position to provide an assessment as a land supply in February, there is no guarantee that the outcome of this assessment will demonstrate a housing supply in excess of 30 years. We must also be cautioned that, notwithstanding the robustness of the evidence used, any even 5-year land supply position is potentially open to challenge. And then just to say that the remaining elements of the HELA, including the assessment of new promoted housing and improvement sites, take place in hopefully moving towards a conclusion of the window. Maybe by June next year.
Mark, is there anything you wish to defend?
No, I don't think so. No. And, yeah, covered that very well. It is but just to reiterate, it is a very resource intensive process that we have to go through. Because as was shown at the Torrington appeal, the evidence we have to get must be very robust through the 5 years by deliverable housing sites.
I think the jury are out whether Michael Gove coming back to levelling up will help in this situation or not. But perhaps we don't go down that route at the moment. I mean, that is an ambitious timetable. And I think it's up to us to make sure the resources are there to help them, deliver this. So, any other issue? Councillor Haynes, then Councillor.
Yeah, I'd just like to bring up the issue of participation on the panel. I hope that everybody's read the statement Mr. Keith Goodridge, which was circulated, expressing his concern that there isn't sufficient representation on the panel of community, and referring to government guidance in this respect, and also the constitution of the panel. To ensure the wider interests and concerns of the local community are represented. At the moment, there's just 2 representatives, local community representatives. It's Councillor James and his equivalent North Devon District Council. While I wouldn't for one moment suggest that those 2 people are not really friendly people to represent or to state what they think of community concerns, I should point out that as far as I understand on previous panels, there were 2 representatives in each district council, so now we've only got 1 each. The main point is that concern that Mr. Goodridge has, which I support and which Northern Town Council supports. Also, I think Georgetown Council in their representations to the consultation process also feel that there isn't a wide enough community representation. I know I've raised this with Ian Rowland several times, and I know what his views are, but nevertheless, there exists a concern. Do have a proposal, but I don't know whether the has the ability to consider proposals.
I mean, I did mention earlier on when you raised this, Councillor Haynes, that we did hold a special meeting to talk about the composition of this panel. You were invited.
I regret that I didn't attend it until soon.
So, but I mean, I think that what I'm reluctant to do in a public meeting is to open a debate about where people could pick off the recommendations of the officers that went through a robust scoring process. So it's not just about the community. We're going to open the debate if we're not careful about which architect, which architect. Which building firm were involved, and we could go through them all if we open that debate again.
Talking about that.
But no, but we dealt with it as a whole, Councillor Haynes, when we had that special meeting.
Yeah.
So I'm just reluctant to go down that
Well,
road. As long as I'm in your hand. I think today is about the programme and an update on the process rather than the makeup of the panel. But I'm in your hands.
My proposal is that the constitution is revisited. You to consider widening the representation on the panel.
In looking at that timetable, if we are literally on the eve of starting this process, that would be delayed as well. Councillor James.
Yeah, well, my issue with, I agree with where we are, is that once we start opening it up to more public representation, the question is how many, what areas we go to, who should be those public, and we will end up having a whole debate which will put us a long way behind, and we actually will not resolve anything because nearly every parish, every town will want a representation, and we are elected, myself and the leader, to represent the community, and I'm quite happy with where we are. I propose that's where we stay.
I would second that as a proposal.
Thank you, councillor Paul. So do you wish to move an amendment? I'll see if there's a second of it.
Yes, mine was that the Heather panel constitution is revisited to consider an increase in the number of community representatives in order to comply with the requirement of the constitution. The wider interests and concerns of the local communities are given full consideration. That's fine.
Is that seconded? I think it's worth remembering that this is a sort of a technical exercise rather than a political exercise, and it's something that has to be done with an open mind, and a lot of people that put their name forwards will have particular interests that would make their involvement a little bit awkward at times, I think. That's just my opinion. If that amendment is it seconded, not it falls.
No. At the very least, go back to 2 representatives from each council. Or is it reduced to 1 from each council?
But I mean, I think it's understanding the process. This is a technical exercise to look at whether sites can or cannot be developed, not whether they should be allocated or not. And I think that is that's a different kettle of fish. And I'm certainly supporting councillor Hames. And if it was the second part of the process to decide which sites go in the plan and which sites don't, then that's something that we do need to be much more open in this process with the whole community. I do agree with that. But in this process, it is a technical exercise. Mark.
Yeah, can I just add, it's my recollection for doing the SHAR that we did only have 1 representative from each council. It wasn't 2.
Oh, it's councillor Yabsley was involved from.
Yes, councillor Edmonds was also party, but they didn't come together.
No, they.
Yeah, and I can't remember the Torridge.
Councillor Simmons and I think Councillor Watson.
Anyway. Thumbs up in your hands. No, I've got a proposal and a seconder that we don't revisit the panel. Are you proposing that we accept this?
We accept,
the
yeah,
report
and report.
and the timetable?
And the timetable,
let's
yeah.
Just get
Yeah.
things moving.
We have to move on with it.
Thank you,
Yeah.
councillor Jen. Those in favour then, please. Those against? Yes, sorry, stay. Thank you, councillor.
Chair. Ask the questions I'm going to ask before we move on to.
Thank you.
One of my questions have been answered by Mark and Ben, but can I have a percentage of how far we are to this 5-year land supply? Yeah, well, and do either of these gentlemen believe that more greenfield sites available for building homes? The government has changed its mind on quite a few things with the government, with the planning process. We've got some greenfield sites that would be available and not cause dissent amongst the residents if they became homes for people, because this is what we need in Gloucester and Forest. Greenfield sites, please.
Well,
Give us a percentage first, Mark.
I'll pass that if you don't mind. I mean, obviously, we are still working off the principle from what was set out in the Torrington appeal that we've got 4.23 years. Now, obviously, what we're trying to establish now is can we get to 5 and above? And that's part of the HELA process, and that's what our main focus is. As you're aware, we've had a number of what I would call hostile planning applications that aren't necessarily plan-led, and developers and landowners are challenging our current 5-year land supply. We've obviously had to approve some have gone to appeal and been allowed. But if a suitable greenfield site was not necessarily plan-led, but it was considered to be acceptable, you know, we are in a position where our 5-year land supply, so a greenfield site that's not plan-led may be acceptable.
Okay. You don't think that the government are coming to allow more greenfield sites because they have allowed brownfield sites, not greenfield?
We just don't know. I mean, clearly their main focus is still brownfield sites. We haven't got many brownfield sites as councils. And of course, our housing requirement, we are comfortable with, and our housing supply across both councils, we've got more than enough supply to meet our requirement. What we obviously struggle with as councils is delivery.
This is it, aren't they going to be built? Those that we were quite forced in a way to give planning permission to, a lot of them aren't. now. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Chair.
Councillor Joe Tacker.
Well, it's really a statement, Chair, on the question, but the planning system is in such a broken state till somebody gets hold of it and gets to grips with it. We're never going to find possibly any of these answers we're looking for. This 5-year land supply, well, you know, I have great respect for our officers, but they haven't got a hope in hell, have they? Because developers will do what they want to do.
I think that this process and this timetable does give us some target dates and some hope that we can produce the evidence to defend some hostile applications. And, you know, I mean, we are in a system that should be plan-led. And the idea is that this process comes first and then the applications come further down the line. But we spent the last 2 years trying to defend and make decisions on hostile applications. Both sides of the wall, haven't they? So both in Torwich and in.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying that 5-year land supply is only material consideration. You know, we have got other policies in the plan that would still potentially refuse a planning application. Yeah, you know, the 5-year land supply isn't the be and end all in terms of, well, you haven't got one, therefore you have to approve the application. You know, that's not the case. You know, and we still have the ability to refuse application. And then obviously it can go to appeal, and who knows what the planning inspector will do.
I mean, we good answer. I was just going to give Sean Harrington a ring then, but I don't. But no, I mean, the thing that we can do, both officers members, is put all our effort into this process because that will give us the evidence base to defend some pretty horrendous sites that I know are being looked at the moment. That, you know, a lot of us I know don't.
The 4.3, how far off are we to the magic 5?
Well, as a we
You get away with this.
don't
You're pretty close, aren't you?
Well, yeah, as I said, the Torrington appeal established 4.23 years. We've got no problems in terms of supply. It's delivery, which is totally out of our control. So I can't give you whether we're 4.9, 5.6, 6.6. We have no idea, and hopefully by February we will be clearer where we are with 5-year land supply. But then, as I say, there's no guarantee that we will have one, and there's no guarantee that we will retain it for very long.
We got a particular. We got a
Make a comment. As a historian, you know what I'm talking about. Schleswig Holstein.
Yeah.
It's only 3 people knew the answer to that. One was mad, one was bad, and the other one was died. That's the sort of fog we're in at the moment.
Great officer.
I think the governor of the Bank of England's statement yesterday probably put down on the fact that the supply will just go down. Because where we've given planning permission, quite a few of the sites will be slow or stopped for a while.
Yeah.
Because it's projected that house prices are going to go down.
Yeah.
Developers, it's not the sort of position they want to be in, is it?
I mean, I know, I've had sight of the letters that the 2 teams have been sent, or the team have been sending to owners and developers and allocated site. And in a way, none of them have got any interest in giving you the information that we all need, the community, because they don't want to jeopardise their allocation. So they're very reluctant to give it away, and particularly national house builders are particularly unhelpful, aren't they? I mean,
Yes.
I'm afraid. But we've got to do the best we can. And I think we're coming on a minute to viability, and that's something too that is a real issue that we've had recently, isn't it? But we're happy then to deal with this item on the HELA. We agree the report and the progress, the timetable suggested. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We move on then to item number 9 and the strategic viability assessment. Helen, you need to pack that. Thank you, Ellen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, this item, as per the commitment that was made back at the July committee meeting, when it was indicated that viability paper would come before the committee to set out the process that's involved with the viability assessment of local plans, as distinct from the viability process that takes place with planning applications, which certainly members of respective plans committees are all too aware of at the moment. The reason for bringing the paper forward at this relatively early stage of the process is to recognise how important this issue is to members, to our communities, and also to officers, and recognising the frustration I think that we all share when we're not meeting the 30% target for having to negotiate with developers on 106 packages. The paper also, I mean, it's very high level. It's to inform and advise as to the process, but it also reflects how we're actually doing under the current plan and how we're faring in terms of achieving affordable housing on our development sites. Both councils have seen applications of straight committee level that hearing was declined. So the paper looks to set out the process that's involved, the strategic viability assessment, and then how some reflection, but like I said, it is relatively high level. So in terms of the process, it is very much as with local planning sort of application level viability assessment, it is very much directed by national policy guidance, the national planning practice guidance. There are clear methods set out which all viability assessment have to follow. So set out in your report from page 100, there's sort of a summary of the key elements of the NPPF which talk about viability assessment at that strategic level. So, for example, paragraph 34 of the NPPF, it recognises that plans should set out contributions expected from development, including levels, types of affordable housing, other infrastructure, and there's all manner of other things that our developments have to provide for, such as education, health, transport, green infrastructure. However, that same paragraph of the NPPF is very clear that such policies should not undermine the deliverability of the plan. So it's all about striking that balance to achieve the development that's needed for our communities, but also recognising that to do that, it has to be a viable prospect for developers. Paragraph 58 of the NPPF is clear in that where there are up-to-date policies that set out contributions expected from development, applications that comply with those are assumed to be viable. All viability assessments to reflect the recommended approach in national guidance, including standardised inputs, but also be made practical. So any assessment at such a time as we do it has to very much follow that guidance. The definition of developable in the NPPF, again, that specifically says it has to be a site that could be viably developed. Envisaged. Paragraph 124 also talks about efficient use of land, taking into account local market conditions and environment. There's a very strong theme running through the NPPF. Ultimately, at the point of identifying sites for allocation, the NPPF at paragraph 68 does refer to the SHLAR process, and the policy should identify a sufficient supply and mix of sites, taking into account availability, suitability, and likely economic viability. So it's an important issue. To combine with that, we've got the NPPG, which provides guidance on methods and how that should be approached. evidence of infrastructure and affordable housing need has to feed into the process. And really importantly, the MPPG is very clear that it has to be a proportionate assessment of viability that takes account of all relevant policies. The key role for viability assessment is at the plan making stage. The MPPG is very clear on that. Viability assessment should not compromise sustainable development, but it is really essential that it ensures that policies are realistic and that the total cost of policies are recognised. All these things coming through. Also importantly, and I know this is a question sort of out on site by site basis when sites that have been allocated then don't meet those full policy line levels. The MPPG is very clear that assessing at plan level the viability side of things does not require individual testing of every site. Assurance that individual sites are viable. There's a typology approach that the MPPG directs towards where similar types of sites can be grouped together and viability tested by that sort of method. However, it does recognise that more detailed assessment may be necessary for key sites. On sort of key sites, that could include our strategic sites, which are key in delivering a huge amount of infrastructure. There can be sort of complexities of multiple landowners, land utilisation that comes with that, and actually securing infrastructure in a timely manner. The plan makers also can undertake site-specific viability for sites that are critical to delivering strategic priorities. The MPPG is very clear. So I think that the clear message from national viability is significantly important, particularly at the plan making stage. However, it's high level at the plan making stage. However, there is scope to identify more site-specific assessments on key sites, for example, the strategic sites. Looking at the current local policy position, the North Devon and Torridge local plan, the key policies that relate to viability, affordable housing and securing planning obligations are policies ST18 and ST23. So ST23 is more general sort of infrastructure policy, fairly all encompassing, really all manner of things such as education, health, which we're increasingly seeking obligations for now, can fall under the provisions of policy ST23. Policy ST18 specifically relates to affordable housing and sets a target for up to 30% dwellings from developments to be provided as affordable at the specified 10-year split. Back in July, members of the committee approved the affordable housing SPD, so that's now been used by both councils. And that goes into a lot more detail on viability and the delivery and securing of affordable housing. It's recognised in terms of the current local plan that the evidence base that informed that, so the previous viability assessment does date back to 2015, straight 2016 now. So it is somewhat out of date, which is part of the new local plan review. Clearly, that would need to be updated. Looking back at the inspector's report that informed the North Devon Torridge local plan, the conclusions sort of underpinning that, it is interesting when you look at the inspector's assessment at acceptability of 30% target. And interestingly, she noted that any reduction in that overall requirement in the policy would actually be likely to reduce the overall average that can be achieved across the plan area as a whole. And she also recognised that any attempt to address variations on a site-by-site basis in the plan would require a disproportionate level of detail. So that 30% level is a target. So it's never the intention that every site coming forward would secure 30%. That's just the current picture of where we are. Thought it'd be interesting to look at sort of viability outcomes during this plan period. Some of this has been taken from the toolkit review, which has been undertaken by the senior planning officers, policy officers. You can see significant increase there in the BCIS tender price, increased by 10.9% in the 2018 to 22 period, but actually as much as 64.1% over the wider plan period. We're aware of that increase in build costs. Importantly, the current plan does allow for consideration of viability to enable housing delivery. And also just touching on that 30% target again, the head nurse set out an estimated annual level of need of 345 dwellings. With the supply that we established in the current local plan, 30% was never actually able to meet that. So I think it's always recognised with the journal sort of input with that. So what both councils have done in the policy changes is have a look at housing developments and how they've fared in terms of achieving affordable housing. And it's really interesting to look at these high level statistics over North Devon Council point of view since 2017 until summer of this year. Across all eligible sites for affordable housing, 38% of all of those applications are fully policy compliant. And on average, across all developments, 22% affordable being secured. There are some examples that were given where that 30% hasn't been secured, so Westercott being one of North Devon Council's significant strategic sites, which I believe secured 10% affordable, but was subject to significant costs. I understand from your development management officers, there's currently an allocated site in Mankey, which is on a much smaller scale, but there are significant abnormal associated with that, which is going to result in less affordables. And the Laceworks in Barnstaple, I think vacant building credit was introduced there, hence. So there's often a narrative behind these sites where we're not securing policy compliance. Looking at the picture in Torridge, since 2016 through to 2021, so again a 5-year period, 58% of sites eligible for affordable housing have secured policy compliant levels. And I think well, slightly lower in terms of that average across all sites being 21%, but both councils have similar level of affordable housing being achieved over that 5-year period and above 20% against a 30% target, which I think seeing the statistics, it actually indicates that the plan is succeeding in securing affordable housing. Recognising that 30% target was never intended to be secured across all sites. At Torridge, we've had some interesting sites come forward recently, certainly our Billiford West urban extension and our another significant allocation here at West of Buckley Road. 2 big greenfield sites have just gone through our committee last month, both fully policy compliant, which one was 750 dwellings and 400 dwellings. The Billiford West, the Wigsford site is interesting. It did go through our committee back in 2016 when I think it was 16% affordable was being achieved. For various reasons, the 106 has never been signed, so going back and revisiting that viability process, we're now at 30%. We have got some big brownfield sites, Brunswick Worm, Orphan, Great Torrington Creamery, significant costs associated with delivering those, so both of those schemes now have permission, neither of them are able to provide any Section 106 at all, but the benefits of developing those sites was considered to outweigh that. Another one that I know certainly our councillors committee considered, and I know certainly Councillor Haynes is more member, our allocation law 07, which is a greenfield site in Appleborough, came forward, bulk of it, and viability indicated that it couldn't provide any housing due to significant drainage infrastructure issues. However, the remainder of that allocation is coming forward fully policy compliant. It can large across that sort of multiple landowner, but trying to localisation. So I think sort of moving forward, there's clear methodologies any viability assessment will need to follow, but I think really reflecting on the success of the current local plan, there is further analysis that is recommended under the next agenda item to really look at the basis for under delivering against the 30% target. And that work has started across both councils. So really delving into why we're not securing 30% on certain sites, what the lessons can we learn, and then specifically on our strategic allocations, which is so crucially important in terms of key bits of infrastructure. And they're not always straightforward. Some have been more straightforward than others. So what can we learn from that in terms of identifying future strategic allocations? I think there's some principles that go beyond the national guidance. It's ensuring that collaborative approach and get some local partners. It's incredibly positive that we have a viability expert on the Hula panel. That is incredible to get that level of expertise at that really early stage. It is a high level assurance. It can never be a fully detailed assessment of every site that we're going to allocate. But at an early stage and in learning from the lessons of our current strategic allocations, we can develop the scope that actually does look in a bit more detail at relevant sites, so we can be sure that we're allocating the right sites for development. It is an iterative process. When we come to develop a brief for viability assessment, also how it can fit in at different stages rather than retrofitting at the end. To be commissioned as early as possible, obviously depending on which direction members decide to go, and that it must take account of the methodologies set in the MPPF and the but also there is guidance out there in terms of pads, and bricks, so have some guidance. So just finishing in terms of the recommendation, it's as set out in the report. It's to note actually the commentary on the level of affordable housing that's being achieved. I think that the statistics do indicate that the plan is succeeding in securing affordable housing. And, you know, it's important to note the intention never was to secure 30% on everything. So the fact that over the respective 5-year periods, where more than 20% in both councils is actually pretty good in the context of market conditions, which are ever changing. It's to note the report and just agree that the principles within it can be used to further develop a brief for embedding viability considerations within the process, importantly in a proportionate manner at the various stages of preparation, and to acknowledge that a comprehensive review of viability of the local plan and development options will be needed, and there will be a need to commission expertise to do this at the appropriate stages. Clearly, the direction of the review of the local plan is going to impact on which direction at what point that comes.
And the bike isn't gone. Well done, Stuart.
Yes, so yes, I hope that's been useful, and certainly happy to answer any questions that any members might have.
You mentioned about having an expert on the panel, which I think is really, really useful. But I mean, you mentioned Westica. It's one that I get sleepless nights over all that. What I was going to say, whatever we decide in a minute, or whichever direction we go, completely new plan or review, there are bound to be some additional allocations. I mean, would it be worth us considering looking? We've already gone out to ask for some tenders from specialist people. I mean, along with Lionel's expertise, is it worth us thinking about a budget price that would actually test some of these in real proper viability terms before we allocate them, before we actually put them in the plan?
Yeah, and I think that's what's sort of coming out of the guidance and some of the best practice. It's looking at the best time to do this, and certainly when we're starting to look at allocations, particularly on strategic sites or sites that are keen to enable further development, then guidance is clear that there is merit in having more focused look at those. Certainly the expertise on the healing to help with that. I'm not sure at what stage it was commissioned with the last plan. I obviously wasn't involved. I don't know if Mark, Ian and Dawn are able to comment on that.
It was the first stage of it was quite early.
Yeah.
Because it was typology based.
Yeah.
It was relatively early, but as you saw, it was 2015 based in terms of the.
Yeah.
So it wrapped up to publication stage. So right at the end of the plan was when we got those final recommendations. I think we also have to bear in mind that it was predicated on the introduction of SIL as well, infrastructure levy. So what we are seeing is we're seeing probably significantly larger packages of Section 106 infrastructure and financial contributions from a lot of sites than we probably would have achieved through SIL as well.
Yeah.
And we were looking at a very modest Section 106 contribution on top of that SIL. And the beauty of not having that SIL in place is that we have been able to negotiate the balance between that affordable housing and that Section 106 package, whereas with SIL you've had that rigidity of not being able to dismiss it. So it was procured on a different basis, I think is the message.
Yeah, but I think, you know, hopefully that we want to be, it's proportionate at different stages. So where we can look at some of these key sites earlier, then we certainly should. I mean, the Woodham Road site's a really good example that it was allocated as the key allocation for Appledore, which is a difficult place to find the right site to allocate anyway, due to the sort of nature of it. And then, you know, at that detailed stage, we're finding that significant requisition for a new surface water pipes required. But then having said that, would there have been a better site in terms of placemaking terms? So it's all about striking that balance and lots of other considerations, but this being a key theme, I think.
I can remember debating that one in an earlier life when I was on the local plan working party of the state. Everything comes round again to the local government. And a really, really useful report. I think banging it up at this stage and having this chat around it is really good. Members. Councillor Morgan,
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is one of the areas where we get quite a lot of flack from the general public, because they see that our policy is 30% and we don't actually manage to do that on many of our sites. I'm just wondering if you mentioned 22% and 21% as this sort of average. How does that compare with other authorities, say in Devon? Have you any ideas on that?
I wouldn't have that information to hand, actually. It's a really interesting question, actually. It would be, because obviously with South Devon, there's an extra, there are different economic contexts to those, and it's with your scale of allocation as well, sometimes, is to divide into it. But yeah, I think simple answer, that's a really exciting, we don't have it, you know, it's certainly something we could do through the policy group network that you have in
We can certainly ask the question of our counterparts at different
Yeah.
authorities. I'm not sure whether they'll have that information to hand or not. It'd only be if they've got a purpose for that, as we did in terms of exploring this viability side of things and thinking about how successful we were doing with that policy as part of this review process. So it may depend on where they are with their plan review process. But we can certainly ask, and I'll raise that. I think I've got a Devon Planning Officers Group meeting in December.
And just to continue with that, I mean, one of the big concerns is the cost of building is going up and up and up at the moment. And is that, do you think, going to make it go down even lower? That's a real concern.
Yeah, which is a more site-specific basis that we're all feeling from a development management point of view. I think the build costs have been going up, also the sales values have been up, so we've actually seen quite good outcomes.
they've actually stopped now. I mean,
But this is it, isn't it? It's-
viewings are down to sort of 40-30%.
Yeah,
This is trust is.
prices are falling, so we could see a more negative position.
So for wider question. When we're looking at the biodiversity and the national planning framework and guidance and so on, where does the commitment to net zero 20 reaching that? And the sorts of properties that are being built at the moment achieves that goal?
Yeah.
So what commitment do we get from the developers? They retrofit businesses stuff to be able to retrofit those houses. Those people are something that possibly going to go down in value. We're living going at the moment. That goal.
New rates are beginning to help a bit more.
They are.
Beginning to kick in now, aren't they?
Yeah.
Very slow, aren't they? It's too slow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think there's a difference in the success of new build compared to the retrofitting, isn't it? And so with both of those as well.
I mean, the cost of doing it in the first place is a lot
Yeah.
cheaper,
Yeah.
and that's why we support that.
But we should, as Chair said, the change in building and being is certainly helping that. And it, you know, it is a much wider issue, you know, but certainly at site by site level, it should be reflected in those requirements developers should be reflecting in their appraisals.
Yeah.
I think from a plan making point of view, that is a consideration that's going to have to factor in that overall viability picture and the different things that the plan is achieving, reaching that percentage of affordable facilitating.
Yeah. It's all part of the sustainability, isn't it? Earlier in discussion to three key aspects of environment and social. To the key parts of sustainability, and they are really independent. So you can't just separate economic, seems to be the case at the moment. Things that they put through.
You actually look at the housing stock analysis across certainly Northern, I imagine Torwich is similar. The retrofit project is, well, it is absolutely daunting.
I mean, Ilfracombe was Victorian, isn't it?
I mean, we've got a report on strategy committee on our side on Monday, dealing with some of this, and I've had a meeting with Jeremy Mann and Chair of our parish council, who's leading the retrofit thing for 361 Energy, trying to get some projects off the ground. The amount of money involved is frightening. So I think you're right, Graham, that, you know, building regs are the answer, because the developers know they've got to meet them. There's no negotiation over it. They've got to meet them. They need to go further. Any other points? If not, you're happy to move the recommendation? Thank you. Those in favour? Thank you. Anyone against? Thank you very much. Straightforward item now. We thought we'd leave it, the easy ones to the end, Ian.
Okay.
So item 10, which is the chunky bit in the agenda, obviously, is local plan review, project review. So over to you, then, Ian.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was going to be a double act with myself and Elizabeth D from the North Devon team, but unfortunately she's unwell this afternoon. But we do have Dawn as well, so she's going to support me in this item.
Thank you.
So it's presented as a discussion paper for today, really, and I think that's an important point to make at the start. It's not presented to require you to make a decision on the way forward today, and that's around the sort of extra work that we're going to introduce, and also being mindful of the PAS offer as well. So it's about making sure that we're thinking about that. Of course, you're welcome to think about it and give a direction of travel and even direct us if you wish to do so. But it's not presented as that. It is a discussion paper, and it's setting out hopefully a lot of the things that you will need to consider and have thought about as you make a direction to go forward with a plan review and an update. So it's set out on pages 111 to 274 of the agenda, and by that sort of set of pages, you'll see that an extensive amount of work has been done already with a toolkit to inform where we are today, but we're not at the end of that journey. So we put a few slides together which supplement and complement your report. So updating the local plan, we agreed to, or yourselves as members agreed at the end of 2020 to undertake a comprehensive review and update to the plan. And that, I think at that time, was considered an appropriate response. We had a series of external pressures. We had national planning reform that was going to make plans look fundamentally different. We had the impact of Brexit coming about, which we weren't really sure what the impact was going to be on the economy.
Now we know.
We had a whole series of potential housing issues that were coming forward, and we know how that's propagating out. And we had a climate crisis as well that was really starting to drive our thinking. And that was leading to a bit of a reconsideration of some local priorities as well. And it also offered us that opportunity to address some policy gaps. I think tied to that, we also had this government deadline of December 2023, where they wanted us to have an up-to-date local plan in place, recognising that our plan would have effectively been out of date as of October 2023, having regard to those big planning reforms that we knew were probably going to drive it to be out of date at that point in time. So after our Joint Planning Policy Committee meeting in July, we were asked to reconsider whether a comprehensive update remains the most appropriate course of action. And I think one of the drivers for that was the local government financial context. Preparing a local plan is a very costly thing to do, in the region of over £100,000 of direct costs last time around. And that doesn't take account of all the officer time and all of the other resources that are internal to the council that you have to direct towards that. So you're talking several £100,000 to bring in a plan in a comprehensive manner and doing it that way. And then also a changing national context. I'm not sure that any of us really know where we're going at the moment with planning reform. And I don't think we necessarily did back in July. We could see the changes of dynamic and the changes of direction there. And it seemed that there was a pulling back from the reforms that we were expecting back in December 2020 when we made that initial decision. So it's a question of whether or not plans will really have to look that different to what we expected at that point in time. So we have a very different context, I think, now to we did back then. And then it's about member aspirations as well, I think, and whether or not they remain the same as they did back then. And what are the real drivers for change? What are the things that aren't working in this existing local plan? Is it that a plan update or a comprehensive plan update is necessary to actually deliver on those? Is it that that's the right way forward? So I think it's certainly not as clear cut from our perspective and from a professional officer's perspective in terms of a direction of travel now as it was back in December 2020. I think we were very clear and we were pretty resolute back then that that was the right course of action. So that does pose challenges in terms of us presenting recommendations to yourselves as well, I think. So we do have to be mindful of that. And I think it really gives an impression that there may be choices to be made, and maybe choices to be made by yourselves as members with the advice of officers. Usefully, the Planning Advisory Service, and Martin that you heard from earlier, they provide some support tools to allow us to inform this process and to inform that debate and that decision making. They provide a toolkit which is split into 4 parts that allows you to reconsider and review your existing plan and make a judgment about whether or not it's actually still fit for purpose. And it gives you a nice structured way of doing that. And it gives you a comprehensive and a logical approach to really considering it and making sure you're going through that in a sensible way and allowing you to hopefully come to some conclusions. So we completed the draft of that back in early 2021 after we'd made that decision, or members have made that decision to do the comprehensive update. That was more of a sense check for us to make sure that that was an appropriate direction of travel. But we didn't need to go into the same level of detail as we do if we're reconsidering all options as we are at this stage. So we've started to pick that back up. So as I say, it's split into 4 parts. Part 1 is an overarching assessment, and it allows you to look at much wider elements such as how are we doing against our housing numbers? How's our housing supply looking? Are the objectives of the plan being delivered? All right, have the economic conditions changed, for example? And how does the plan marry up to our corporate priorities now compared to when we were back at that stage? And they are very detailed documents. Part 2 goes into more compliance and conformity with national planning policy. So it drills down and gives us a checklist of all of those different components of national planning policy and allows us to sense check each element of our local plan to see whether or not we're in conformity with that, whether we've got bits missing from national planning policy that we need to look at and isn't currently covered in our plan, or whether or not we've got bits that actually national planning policy has changed subsequent to the introduction of our plan that we need to be looking at and revisiting. So it gives us that really structured approach to go through all of those key different components of national policy, which you'll know with 56 pages of policy, all intertwined and interconnected. It gives us that structured way of looking at that and making those judgments. And that part 2 of it then feeds back into part 1 and that overall holistic assessment. So officers have completed drafts of those 2 parts of the toolkit, and they're Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 of your report. They are very lengthy and they do have a lot of detail in them. And they have collated a lot of technical information and a lot of data to inform that as well. But if we really want to understand whether or not our plan is fit for purpose, then we need to drill down to that level of detail to really understand that. So the draft findings from the toolkits, as are reported in your report in front of you, are that the plan generally remains broadly effective at shaping and delivering development. If you look at our development management processes, and I would say with the caveat of the 5-year housing land supply, the policies are relatively successful at delivering what we want to achieve on the ground and through our development management processes. It's generally, as you've heard from Helen, achieving the delivery of affordable housing, maybe not as much as we would like to see, but probably in line with probably expectations in terms of what we would have thought would probably come forward. And on the whole is delivering the required infrastructure. Now, I'm not saying it's delivering all of the infrastructure that we would like to see across Northern Devon, but it is generally being successful in delivering the infrastructure that's required to support the developments, the individual developments that are coming forward. And on the whole, we're seeing it deliver that economic development land that we wanted to see come forward. Now, that may be not driving the economy in the way that we wish, and there's lots of changes around that, but in terms of those allocated sites, we are seeing a lot of those now starting to come forward and deliver economic land. However, as it says at the bottom there, we are recommending that some further data gathering, some research is required to allow us to finalise those toolkits and to inform decision making. And Dawn can go at the end of this presentation through some of that if members are interested in hearing the scope of that work and what we think is required to allow us to really make the final judgments around some of those aspects. That's not to say that the plan is perfect, and we all know we've all got our own individual gripes with it. And there are areas of silence and there are areas of non-compliance that are coming out of the toolkit assessment and what we would all know already. So the approach to town centres, and this is really the strategic approach to town centres. This is around our development management policy. It's very much about retail and retail-led, those what we call use class A1 as it was, and the primary focus of shops and that being the driver for protection in town centres and for the economic growth. Now we all know that with changes to use classes, with changes to the approach the government has brought in, that's really not the most appropriate way to manage our town centres in the north from a development management perspective. But if we look at our strategic approach to town centres, it's probably still broadly sound. It's about the vibrancy, it's about the vitality of them, it's about making sure we protect that core town centre use, protecting from sequential out of town uses. So that's all still sound. And I think some of the allocations around the town centres, whilst the uses maybe that we would envisaged for them to support our town centres may not be exactly the same as they were in the plan, they're still pretty good. The actual sites we'd probably still want to see redeveloped. In terms of demonstrating a 5-year housing land supply, we know we're in a predicament with that and that it's problematic for both councils. However, I think as officers, we question whether or not it's a problem created by the plan itself. And I think we'd probably say not. You look, we had a housing requirement of 17,200 when we adopted the plan. At that point of adoption, we could demonstrate a supply of over 20,000, and that would have only gone up given the amount of applications and permissions we've seen granted subsequently. So it's about that, not that supply side issue from a delivering permissions, but it's about that supply side from deliverability of those sites and seeing it pulled through to development on the ground, and that challenge of getting developers to actually give us that information and show us that we can prove that 5-year housing land supply rather than having that pipeline of supply there. So I think there's a question there for members around is a plan review and updates and additional allocations, is that going to solve that problem? Or is it a different issue and needs a different solution really? I'm not convinced personally that a plan update is going to be the panacea to solve our 5-year housing land supply. The approach to calculating our housing requirements, that's changed since we adopted our local plan. There's now the introduction of a standard methodology, and that's a government dictated approach to what our housing number should be, or the starting point for our number. For now, we hear that may be disappearing, and that was alluded to earlier as one of the challenges with commissioning evidence right now, as Nina picked up. We would struggle to commission consultants to prepare a housing requirement for us when we believe that housing requirement may be derived from a different approach in the very near future. Certainly that was one of the elements that was touted around the planning professional news quite a lot when the leadership contest was happening for the Conservative parties, and we're still not clear where that is going. So that is a challenge. That being said, the standard methodology comes out with a number that's not too dissimilar and even a little bit less than our housing requirement is now. Now, that could be beneficial in terms of a plan review. It allows us to potentially get rid of our backlog if we were to look at a new updated local plan. And we could have a modestly lower housing requirement. Setting aside that we need to consider things like delivery of affordable housing, the impact of second homes, the impact of what we might want to do with the economy. So that may be elements that would push that number up. But the approach has changed. So there's an element there of non-compliance in that sense. But whether or not it means that we need to take a plan review, possibly not. We're silent on coastal change management areas. We don't have them in our plan at the moment. That's one element that we would want to probably look to incorporate in any future plan. Do we need to do a comprehensive update to do that? Possibly not. Maybe able to do that, some of the mechanism and some of the manner. But now, accommodation for travelling communities. On a promise, I think, of the last local plan examination, we were put in a position where we need to make provision for accommodation for travellers. We had looked to do that through a subsequent development plan document, which would focus on the allocation of sites for that purpose. In December 2020, when we made that decision to look at a comprehensive update to the plan, it made sense to incorporate that in there at that point in time. We may need to look at that differently if we were doing a partial update or doing it in a different way. It's a non-compliant element of our plan. We know we're missing that. It's a hole in our plan at the moment. A biodiversity net gain. At the moment, we have it in our plan and we are in full conformity, but we know that actually the Environment Act, or believe the Environment Act will be taken forward. Again, there's different noise at the national level as to which elements of that will go forward in its entirety or not. We believe it will. That introduces more rigid prescriptive elements around biodiversity net gain. Do we need to do that through a plan review and a plan update? Maybe, maybe not. It may be that we can use the books that we've got in there, or maybe we can do it. So there are areas that we may wish to cover that we know that we should be thinking about. So a draft conclusion really around that toolkit at this stage is that most of the local plan provisions do remain fit for purpose and broadly in conformity with national planning policy, which is a great position to be in, I think, as a local authority and having gone through that, or a pair of local authorities having gone through that. But there are areas that the plan is silent. And part one of the toolkit, question A17, does note that it would be beneficial to update some of those policies and to fill some of those gaps. And we've got this issue where we've got this hole in terms of the significant exception of the housing land supply, private housing land supply. So what could we consider instead if we're not looking at a comprehensive update? Well, we could carry on with that. There's a legitimacy to that. And there's legitimacy to us progressing that. And if there's a package of justification to do so, then that gives us the biggest scope to allow us to do the things that you may wish to do. We could look at a partial update or a plan supplement. It could be that we look at the development management policies, say, and look to tweak those to fix some issues that maybe we've got at that more detailed level. Or we could potentially look at a plan supplement. That could be a climate change document. It could be a traveller's document. It could be a mix of both of those, or with new development management policies to fill some of those holes. We could do that instead. Or, as I said there, we could slow down, we could pause, we could do nothing for now. And there's options there around that. And each of those have their own pros and cons. And there's a little note at the bottom there, I think, that often I think it's forgotten that a comprehensive update doesn't mean that we're just going to throw the baby out of the bathwater. We wouldn't be looking to throw away those bits of the plan that are already good. We may have to re-evidence them, we have to reconsider them and make sure that we take them forward and that they're still fit for purpose. But it doesn't mean that if we've got something that's really great already, that we wouldn't look to reuse that or even improve on it as we take it forward. So even if we are doing a comprehensive update, we would still be looking to make use of those good bits of the plan and that evidence base that we've already got. So the comprehensive update, it is that approach that was previously agreed by members back in December 2020. It would need to be based upon new evidence. because we would need a new plan period. We would be looking at new housing numbers. We would be looking at new town centre evidence, because most of our evidence base is of such an age that it wouldn't be able to sustain a new local plan and rolling forward to that new plan period. Because we need to look at least 15 years from adoption if we're looking at a full new plan. It would reset the housing requirement, as we said before. That may be modestly lower. It may be similar to what we've got now. But the benefit is it removes that backlog from our 5-year housing land supply. And there's a real advantage to that. That sits at about 1,500 dwellings at the moment. And that's quite considerable. That's 2 years worth of supply that's out there. But we have to remember that this is three years away from being adopted. So it's not going to be that short-term fix for that 5-year housing land supply. It gives us the best opportunity to fully embrace that national policy and those local priorities that you might have. We can fully consider all of that. We can wrap it up. We can look to tweak any part of it and direct it the way we want to see, members want to see it, to meet those local ambitions within that national framework. But it is the most expensive and it is the most time consuming, certainly in that short to medium term window. Now the other options may be shorter in the start, but obviously we may then be just pushing back the requirement for a comprehensive new local plan and pushing it down the road. And it doesn't mean starting from scratch, and it doesn't mean ditching those good bits. We would make use of those and the bits that members like, we can try and roll forward and take. And certainly allocations. I think it was raised earlier about would we need to find additional allocations. We've got a huge supply probably already, and most of those sites are probably deliverable. We need to explore whether or not they're still the right allocations if we were doing a comprehensive update. And we'd have to explore whether or not we do need additional sites or not, or different sites. But it gives us that opportunity to do that. But it wouldn't necessarily mean that we're looking for lots and lots of new sites. That partial update or that plan supplement that I mentioned, an opportunity to introduce more targeted changes and additions to the plan that would be much more focused. And the scope is likely to be much more limited, I think, in terms of what you may be able to achieve. You're not necessarily going to be able to change those spatial strategies in there. You get this impact, this kind of a cascade of consequences as soon as we start to change things. So if we start to want to introduce higher levels of sustainable environmental credentials, for example, in development, then we start to impact on viability, which means we have to reconsider our affordable housing position. So you start to unravel things quite quickly if you're not careful. So we do need to be very focused. We do need to understand what we were going to try and achieve if we're going to go with a partial update or plan supplement approach to it. But that's not to say that it wouldn't be necessarily the right course of action at this point in time. We may be able to retain the existing plan period, which means we're not looking at commissioning all of that breadth of evidence to allow us to do that. If we're focusing on development management policies or we're supporting maybe some of the climate change elements through a supplement, then it may be that we can stick with that same plan period. There is that question of whether or not we would need to re-establish our 5-year housing land supply in order to progress that. And we haven't bottomed that out fully. And I think some conversations with PAS are going to be a bit quite useful for us to really think about that a little bit. On whether or not we would be able to look at that DM policies, for example, in isolation. Because we all know that to adopt a new plan, we have to be able to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply at a point of adoption. How that would be perceived if we were looking at just that partial update that didn't touch on those housing supply matters, for example. Would we be able to look at some of those technical detailed elements of tourism policies outside of the scope of having to do that? Of course, we may in January, February time, have a new 5-year housing land supply, and that question may go away. And it would reduce the short-term costs and the time requirements. By targeting that evidence, by targeting that work that we would do as a team and with yourselves as members, clearly we can do it a bit shorter. Clearly we can do it cheaper than we would do if we were looking at that comprehensive update. But that may be only for a fixed period of time. We may need to then, in the future, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years time, look at that update of the plan, maybe sooner than that. And you would likely require a comprehensive update in the medium to the long term. And then there's the option, it's a multitude of options really, which is to kind of keep the options open for now really. We don't have to review our plan until the end of October 2023. That's our 5-year window for our legislative requirements for reviewing our local plan. And it doesn't mean that we have to have updated it by that stage. It means we have to have completed that review process, a formal resolution and decision by the council whether or not it's fit for purpose or not. Now, clearly, we made a decision on that in October 2020 and had a judgment, but circumstances have changed. We may be, through this toolkit, able to demonstrate for the time being that our plan is okay. And we could stick with it. So we could keep the update under review. We could allow time for that national context to stabilise, for us to understand where things are going. It could avoid potentially abortive work, unnecessary costs, and reduce that preparation timeframe overall by taking that short pause. But that wouldn't necessarily identify your locally identified priorities in that short term. There's that compromise there. You're not going to be delivering what you members may wish to be seeing as a change from the existing local plan by taking that approach. But there's also that opportunity. We could be looking at supportive work. We could be looking at putting more resource more quickly into that 5-year housing land supply. We could be updating some of that evidence that we know isn't time critical, pushing forward with the HELA, some of those other bits of work that we would want to be looking at in any case. We could look at enhanced guidance. We could look at supplementary planning documents that may be beneficial to help get the best out of the plan that we've got at the moment. I'm not suggesting that that's the right course of action. That's just one of the options that could be there. It could be that we slow things down. That's the other option in terms of the timings of it. We have elections, as we were hearing about PERDA coming up. Again, that needs to be thought about in terms of the process and the direction of travel we maybe go with the plan and the key decision-making times. So as I said, there's choices to be made, really, I think. The key points coming out of the work we've done so far, the plan is broadly effective from a development management perspective and fit for purpose, albeit it may be not delivering everything that members want to be seeing. The strategies, so the ST element of it, the high level stuff, are generally still robust. They're still delivering what we envisaged them to do, even if that idea of what we wanted to deliver has changed. There are some gaps, as we've talked about, in particular policy areas, that travellers, coastal elements of it. And there's modest non-conformity with different aspects of national policy, which is to be expected, given that they changed national policy 3 times since we adopted our local plan. There's a lack of 5-year housing land supply, which is somewhat problematic, is the term I've used there, both in terms of deciding what we're doing going forwards, and also, of course, in making development management decisions that really drive forward what we want to see. I think the uncertainty in the national context does make it more challenging for us as officers right now to advise you on what is the exact route forward and the best route forward. Normally, and as we hear from ministers and as Martin would normally tell us from Planning Advisory Service, the course of action normally is to push on regardless when you've got that uncertainty and stick with what you know. I think that's when we're in this position where we are reflecting, it makes it that little bit more difficult to necessarily do that. There's an element, I think, of what we want to do in terms of plan making, rather than what we maybe need to do in terms of plan making as well. And I think that comes down to maybe what members would like to see and what members would like to do as their priorities. It may be that we can make a justification that much of this plan is still robust, but it may be not doing what you would like it to be doing. So that's more of a, what would you want it to do, rather than what do we need to do in terms of a plan update. And I think it's really essential for us to understand those specific asks, or as Councillor Hicks put it, I think at the last meeting, what are those red lines really for members about those essential things and the detailed things that you really want to get out of the plan or really isn't doing at the moment. We've done workshops, and we started with this local plan working group a number of years ago, asking some of those questions. But it's about really delving down with all of the members to understand the specifics of what that is, not the high level, we want more affordable housing, but what is it that the plan, particularly having heard about viability, what is it that we want to do differently, that we can't do, or can we do? And I think it's about some challenge there and some discussion around that. So I think there's a little bit of work for us to do before we can come up with a firm conclusion around that. So certainly from officers, our proposed next steps to complete that further technical work that we've got outstanding in terms of the PAS toolkit. That's around some data gathering and data analysis. And as I say, Dawn can touch on that further if you're interested in that. I think we're keen to engage with members sooner rather than later to establish what those red lines are and really to have some quite powerful conversations around that and to really drill down into that in some detail to understand what are those really specific issues. Can the plan do it? Can we do it a different way? Do we need to do a comprehensive update to manage that, or is there another way of doing it? We want to make use of the facility that PAS is offering us to facilitate that process, get Martin involved and the team that they can offer to really make sure and sense check some of that work and even start to guide us in the direction we may wish to go. And then I think it's about reporting back to JPPC with those options and those recommendations following the package of work being put together. So that's our recommendations and our next steps from an office perspective, although obviously we appreciate that members have got the opportunity to direct us in a different way. So those are the recommendations that you have in your reports in front of you, that the committee notes the contents of the attached toolkits and supports their finalisation, which includes that work we've just discussed, to inform future decision making on the scope and review of the update of the local plan. And that we have a open a debate is the second really one for this afternoon, to consider the content of this report, the influences and the presented options for undertaking the update of the local plan. The Chair, I'll hand back to you at that point. I hope that's useful to you. I appreciate it doesn't give you a recommended direction of travel, but I hope you can see the complexities of that and that there are choices to be made potentially.
Thank you, Ian. I mean, it made it very, very useful. You might not say that it gives, it's given me lots of hints, I must admit. I shan't share them yet. I think you're right in terms of the plan. There are a huge chunk of it is doing the job. And I think the criticism from some of us, be they rural members or town members, are all things that I think there's a political will to fix them. So I don't think, you know, you'd have a great problem with members on those main issues. And you mentioned tourism, but I shan't start carrying off again. Members, over to you. Bit of aim first.
Yeah, thanks very much. Ian, for the presentation. I mean, having gone through the toolkits, yeah, okay, so the plan may be working and okay, a large amount of its substance, but my impression is it's not doing various areas, it's not delivering and it's strengthening. I thought that was why we were set up as a committee really to look at that. So my question is, it seems this toolkit is a good basis for members to consider what the red lines are. Is that what the proposal is? You talked about how to engage with, need to engage with members. How's this process going to work out? Is this toolkit going to provide the basis for members to consider?
Yeah, if I can.
Yeah, sorry.
I think, yes, the toolkit should be the driving influence for you to be able to make a decision on the way forward, I think, in terms of that. I think our thinking at the moment would be that we would look to, at the earliest convenience, get a workshop together with members to really drill down into those detailed matters. And maybe it's a two-way conversation between officers challenging members about what the plan can do, can't do, and really understanding what those bits are in terms of that you would want to achieve. And that's not just saying we want to deliver more affordable housing, because we know the challenge with doing that. It's about, well, actually, what would we want to do differently to what our plan does now to achieve that to a certain extent? And I think we need to understand that around the environmental context too. What is it that we're looking to try and do there with the plan to try and strengthen it? So that I think is our thinking in terms of how we can help finalise that work, to be able to come back to you with some recommendations or for you to make that decision at a future meeting.
I think politicians are always impatient, aren't they? So you can guess, but I had the feeling from my July meeting that the emphasis seemed to be of most members that they were going away from the full review towards fixing what needs fixing. I think that is important with the work and Paz is still involved here in what was said. So, I mean, I think bringing up Peter Haynes' point, I think, we can have we can look at our red lines and we've all got probably different red lines. And I think that is something we should do in parallel. But I'm just anxious, looking at, we've only got 2 or 3 meetings left in the rest of this council, that we make that decision pretty quick. And I'm saying probably certainly before Christmas. I think we've just got to get on with it and make that decision. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I thought perhaps I was in the minority of thinking that the local plan isn't that bad. We're off, I missed the last meeting, I'm only a substitute, but we're at a junction, aren't we, where we can go down one road and we can spend hundreds of thousands of pounds and spend months and years, or we can just, and all we'll end up doing is rearranging the furniture. Or we can go down a simpler route. The local plan, I think, very often gets blamed for things which aren't its fault. We can't control what comes forward. We can't control, we're limited on the control of how a developer wants to arrange his housing estates and so forth. We've got no control over highways and what have you. What do we truly expect from our local plan? I think that I like the sound of this idea that we attach supplementary policies to it and so forth, and we concentrate mostly on that area.
Yeah.
I really agree with, I'm sorry, I forget the gentleman's name, the last speaker, but thank you, Ian, for that really comprehensive report. The national planning policy, as I said just now, is in complete turmoil. And you've got the 17th of November, you've got this, I don't know what we're going to expect, but it's all going to have an effect on building, the economy and all that in the future. And I would like to go with probably Ian's, maybe for the sake of a better word, third recommendation. I think we should just slow down and pause, maybe a couple of months. All right, we could have more meetings and that, but there's not a lot wrong with our local plan. It's the system, and it's government interference and things like that. It really has messed the whole issue up. So, Mr. Chair, I would like to think that we could spend an awful lot of money, as the previous speaker said, and offer some time trying to pick something which isn't terribly very much out of date or wrong. So let's just pause for a couple of months and then see what happens on the 17th of November and in the next couple of months, which I think we'll find quite a lot will happen.
Always remember back, and David Borden will remember this, back in 1979. Professor Litchfield, looking at the town centre of Barnsley, said that came forward with the do nothing approach. It's something I never actually support. I think what you're saying, Joe, I think this bit of work from Paz has got to happen. We've got to wait for that. But I think the second option, because I think there are chunkier bits of work than slowing down completely and doing nothing. I think there are things we need.
I'm not exactly saying doing nothing, but I'm just saying.
Ian said doing
Just
nothing.
hang on. Just calm
The do
down.
nothing approach.
Just
Yeah.
calm down for a second and see what happens up in Westminster.
Yeah, Chair, just to point out, we wouldn't be just sat twiddling our.
No, I know. Battleships and cruisers. I'll take Graham, then Cheryl.
Thank you, Chair. There's 8 main headings in there. How many of those do you think we can successfully put SPDs on to bring them in line with current thinking and what councils are trying to achieve to update them? Because I think probably that's really, in my view, that's probably what we need to do at this stage. To reinvent the bits that are fine is a waste of money and time. So we look at the bits that we're missing and the other bits that we need to update to take account of things that have happened or likely to happen in the future. And I would have thought that would have dealt with the problem at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah. Is that something that you can answer, or would you want to speak with Martin and Baz and come back?
I think we'd need to have a discussion around that as a collection of officers and with Paz as to this. And I think this is the challenge. It's the scope of what we want to achieve and what members want to achieve is what drives the decision on how big the update needs to be, whether that's achievable, really, I think. If we were looking at wanting to introduce 30% biodiversity net gain, I'm giving something out there that's big, or 50% affordable housing, and wanted to explore that, and say we were able to achieve one of those, that starts to unravel other elements of the plan, for example. And then you start to have to think about your infrastructure plan. You have to think about actually what's achievable with other parts of the plan, and you start to then look at a whole cacophony of other plan policies that come off of that. And that's where it was just about that drilling down to really understand that. Can we fix some of those other bits of the plan? I think probably some of them, yes, potentially. If we can get a private housing land supply in particular, then we may get to look at the development management policies, which allows us some latitude to do certain things around the plan. And maybe we need to explore that a little bit more in terms of understanding the scope of what we would be able to achieve there. I think the answer is we don't know exactly yet.
Yeah, I just wrote down, introduce more targeted changes to the existing plan, put more resource into 5-year land supply, because that's obviously really affecting everyone who lives locally. That's something that we need to work on, and focus on and create a climate change supplement, recognising the climate emergency and meeting our targets. Because there are things that I don't think we can stop and do nothing in those items. We need to be working on.
Completely agree. Yeah. Jasmine?
Thank you. Because we're a big group, would it be beneficial for Norwich and North Devon Council to split? To discuss how we want to see the bus go forward and what our options or the way we're looking at it, what needs to be changed or what needs to be included in. They may marry up and become the same type of thing. Norwich may want the same type of thing as us, but by sitting in this big group, we're not going to make those decisions in the same way.
One thing I did think, we talked about earlier on the workshops, there's no reason, we've got formal meetings already set. We could set up some virtual things and have breakout groups, and we could, and we'd soon find out those red lines. And I think we could, there's no reason why we can't do that now.
Yeah.
So, you know, over these next few weeks, so, but it's doing the same thing, I think.
Yeah.
Chair,
I mean, Chair, we were all worried about what's going to come out on the 17th. So if we left it till after the 17th, we could have more idea what's going to come out from the new budget and stuff like that. But because we're such a big group, we're looking at it and all individuals got it in mind, but I think we say we got 3 priorities or whatever and move forward that way.
I think, you know, we've talked about some of the rural policies. We could usually deal with that way. Tourism, we could quite easily. I know, Graham, you'd be very keen in terms of climate change. You know, I mean, and I think we could organise that. We could do it.
Yeah.
You know, with that huge amount of resource.
Yeah.
By doing it virtually and having breakout sessions as we did in the workshop before.
Yeah, Chair, I think that was our intention, was to either virtually or physically or both options, was to be able to do that relatively quickly over the next coming weeks, and certainly end of November to early December. That's the timeframe we were touting to ourselves in terms of we could offer that.
Well, we'll come back to the practicalities in a minute then, and Peter.
Yeah, sorry, come back here. Well, just to make a point that government policies and sort of policies are always changing, so when is the best time?
Yeah.
You know, I support the idea, that was what I was trying to get at with having a workshop, certainly. Climate change is the big one. But, you know, I personally don't think that the local plan is just strong enough on climate change. And I was thinking in terms of targets that need to be achieved in development, etc. My query is if there's an SPD on climate change, doesn't that just underwrite and explain existing policies rather than change them?
Yeah, If it was an SPD, indeed, yes. Could we have the option, and we'd need to explore this in a bit more detail,
You could do it.
we have the option of having a complementary development plan document that has the same status as the local plan. Certainly that's the route Cornwall's gone down. Although they do have a very different looking local plan, which is very high level strategic, very much like those who remember core strategy approach. That was very
Remember
similar.
those days.
Yeah, so the Cornwall's local plan is a very high level plan in that sense. So they've been able to bolt on more detailed policies underneath. But is that something we could explore? Yes, as officers, if that's a direction we thought was more appropriate and pragmatic, then we could certainly look into that.
And the timetable would be so much quicker than trying to review the whole plan, wouldn't it?
Potentially, yeah.
Potentially, yeah.
I'm being careful there.
But I don't think that, you know, we haven't got any naysayers here
No.
anymore. I mean, I just think, you know, we know we've got to deal with it.
Yeah.
So how do we fit, do we feel that in parallel to the bit of work with PAS, that we organise some virtual workshops? And is there a good time and day? But that's always a problem, isn't it? We should, I mean, as a formal committee, we seem to be stuck with the constitution telling us we've got to meet on a Friday, we're doing morning. We managed to sneak the morning into the afternoon today. But I mean, does that matter? Or are we to do the polls?
The constitution, I think we are supposed to meet at 2 o'clock on Friday for the committee, but if you're doing a working group, you can meet whenever you like.
Workshop, we could,
Yeah.
should we have a look at room availability, virtual officer availability, and then circulate some potential dates?
Would it be better to do it here or do a virtual one first and then come back to thrash out the, I mean, I'm just thinking, you know, you're talking about, you'd be an all-day session otherwise, I mean, you will. I think if we did it in the 2 stages, if we did something virtually where people went into breakout sessions with particular topics.
Yeah.
And then come back together as a workshop, but a final workshop to sort of pull the things together.
I can send out the lovely doodle polls if everybody wants them. Is there any day that particularly would be a good idea? Is Friday a good day, or in the mornings, or?
We did the planning workshops in the evening, did we not?
Yeah, an afternoon one and an evening.
We don't do one and an evening.
Give the options, don't we?
I'm happy to come to a face-to-face meeting, but I just think if people will be looking at their watches at the end of 2.5 hours thinking, I've got to do A, B, and C. Whereas if we did it in the 2 stages, I think we've got more chance of getting some.
Would you like me to just?
Do you mind?
Next week, we'll come up with a few ones and then I'll email them back.
Yeah, but I think that bit of work needs to happen now because we're making that final decision with the advice from PAS, you know, without sort of tempting out all those issues that you've talked about. And then members could reject the final thing next spring and then we'll be back to square one.
Yeah.
Does that sound like a way forward? Anybody else about that? I mean, we've heard opinions really saying it's not broke and nobody's actually promoted, I don't think yet, carrying on with the complete review as both councils have resolved at the moment. I see some shaking heads around the place.
Well, I think, Chair, at the last meeting, we did decide that what we're doing, we're getting to now, which is PAS review zone. So that it's not a case that we cherry pick and start again. It's that what's acceptable, and the debate last time was who decides what's acceptable, which is why we're looking at PAS.
Yeah.
And then we look at the things that we have got concerns and other members have got concerns about and do mesh the 2 together.
Yeah.
And that's the only way, else we can't start again. We can't do a full review. The issue we have got is both full councils did agree to a full review. So we have to put forward a plan.
But we've got to have an evidence base on
Yeah.
weekend, so I mean, that's what we're about to get together.
Yeah.
Is there anybody that'd like to sort of promote the idea of the full?
Well, we need to spend more time on the important.
I think that seems to be the general feeling. doesn't it? So I mean, if we could, in this exercise and in the work with PAS, look at how a supplement could become part of the local development plan, even though it's on a particular subject, rather than an SPD.
Yeah, we'll explore that. It may be, and I'll be honest with you, it may be that you come back to us with so many things that you want to achieve. It turns that is not possible. and that's not an achievable option. But I think like, we understand the direction he wants us to explore.
And I've still got this sort of strange thing about how neighbourhood planning and what the work we did in chapter 3. I mean, because a lot of us put a lot of effort into the beginning of the chapter 3 process for the rural area. And ended up with nothing that really delivered what we wanted out of that whole process. But a lot of that could be done with parish plans and neighbourhood plans.
Yeah.
So that the development control have got something to look at, aren't they? So I mean, those are the sorts of things that we need to tease out. Aren't they?
Yeah.
You want-
Yeah, just asked our officer, how many red lines would you think would be the way to deal with it?
I don't think it's necessarily about the number, I think it's about the scope of them, very much so. If we were looking at, like I say, adopting something that was expensive on development costs, or we were looking to do something like a new settlement, or we were looking to do something quite dramatic that deviates from our spatial strategies, so our ST policies in particular, then that's problematic. And it may be, and I'll be honest, that some of the things you may wish to do around the rural areas could trip up there. It could be a challenge. It may be that we have to say, well, actually, we would need to look at our spatial strategy, a hierarchy, if that's what you wanted to do. But until we kind of really have that conversation, we've had that at a very high level, and that was great when we knew we were looking at the whole plan, and that we knew we were going to revisit all of these things. So we had that information to help us get that direction at that point and at this point of plan making. But if we're saying we want to think about the cost, we want to think about how we can do it a bit cheaper in a different way, quicker, then we need to look at it slightly differently in terms of that conversation we have with you as members, I think.
Can I just follow up asking you about the democratic process? I see travel sites here listed, is it number 8? And we're silent on them. I just wonder, I mean, nobody's going to vote for the travel site situation, but
How long have you done that?
It has got to be done, that's right. Yeah, so if we were looking at a supplementary plan as a DPD, that would be something we may want to look at, but it may make it more challenging to look at as a topic. If we're doing a comprehensive update, we may have looked at incorporating proportions within our large allocations, for example, that say we will insist on an element of traveller site within a very large allocation, which makes it potentially less controversial, versus a document where we're saying we're going to have these 6 traveller sites, for example. So
I think so, certainly on our side, that we've got a particular problem because we're in a 2-tier system, unfortunately. You know, the highway advice, you know, you can never second guess what's going to come with the next application. How we deal with that and that's where a lot of the plan becomes in a disrepute, not because of the actual spatial policies in it, but when it comes to the application, people don't understand the highway advice that we seem to be given. I don't want to start going into specifics, but how we deal with that, I mean, it is one of the red lines that we got to fix, because the public don't understand. They blame us. They don't blame the county council. The county councillors disappear out of the room as soon as they can when these sort of issues. They take no responsibility for it at all politically. So we're left carrying the bailiwick. It's it's unacceptable. Anyway, that is a red line too.
But Chair, is that a red line for the local plan? Is that something we can address?
I think this is the group that can highlight it and actually deal with it strategically, because I don't think, it's not good enough, quite frankly. No. Anyway, enough of that. It'll be hard. The rail strike's off next week, anyway. It's becoming. I don't know why, but we're. That's it, pretty good news. Have we got as far as we can with this item? Really, really useful debate thing. Your recommendations are not to do nothing, but hang on before we make the decision. But in the meantime, we're going to go ahead with our workshops and our virtual, and then I'll get together. We're going to sort out in the next month or so. Okay? Yeah. We better put a vote on the recommendation.
Are you first proposed?
Thank you very much, sir. So in favour? Anyone against? Thank you very much indeed. I think that's the end of business. Thank you very much. And safe journey out.
Yeah.